On this episode of Crime Scenes with Coffee Beans, join me as I discuss the case where three young women went for a night on the town and never came home. The Claremont serial killer, starting right after this. Hi everyone, welcome to Crime Scenes with Coffee Beans, True Aussie Murders Caffeinated. I'm your host, Belinda Brady, and welcome guys. Welcome to my little podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you are new to this podcast, I'll give you a real quick rundown. I am an Aussie girl who loves discussing true crime, as morbid as that sounds, and one day I decided I would have a crack at my own podcast, and a year later I'm still doing it. So for those who have stuck with me, for those who are just discovering me, thank you. I really appreciate it. And I do try and talk to you guys as though I'm talking to friends, because I am. So yeah, hopefully that comes across. Now, real quick, I will do a quick shout out to some listeners. First off, I have Land Cruiser 1976 who has commented on my YouTube channel. He is in Wagga Wagga in New South Wales. Hello, Land Cruiser 1976. Thank you for joining me. And I've got some people from the US, New Zealand, Hong Kong, the UK, Mexico, and Ireland joining me. I love that. I love Ireland, one of my favorite places. So thank you for joining me. You're all absolute rock stars. Now, straight up, my sources for this episode: abc.net.au, www.doe.network.org, news.com.au, watoday.com, l.com.au, news.com.au. And what am I drinking? Well, I am drinking a large vanilla latte, which I bought from an awesome little cafe down the street from me. It is freezing in my corner of Australia. It is absolutely freezing. Winter is in full bloom, so I need all the caffeine and warmth I can get. So whatever you guys are up to, whatever you're drinking, get comfy, settle in, lend me your ears whether you are settling in bed, if you are listening to this at the gym, in the car, however you are listening to me, grab your favorite drink if you can, and let's hook right into the Claremont serial killer. Now, Claremont is a suburb in Western Australia. It's a western suburb of Perth, and it is a beautiful part of Western Australia. And for the rest of this episode, I will call Western Australia WA. That's how we refer to it, and it's just easier than saying Western Australia. But Claremont is lush, it's clean, and boasts all you need to live a happy life and raise a family. It has an abundance of cafes and schools, and the community is a close and proud one. It also has a thriving pub scene, and in 1996 this was no different, with locals, young and old, hitting the town and letting their hair down at the many hotspots in the area. And the iconic Claremont nightclub, which was called Club Bayview, was a really popular nightclub for the young ones to have a drink and a dance and a catch up with friends. This is exactly what 18-year-old Sarah Spiers was doing on the 27th of January 1996. Sarah was the daughter of Don and Carol and was brought up in rural WA, where her dad was a shearing contractor. And like many families in the area, the Spiers sent their youngest daughter to boarding school, and after she graduated, she landed a job as a receptionist with an engineering company located in the Perth suburb of Subiaco. Now, her co-workers described Sarah as an amazing person who was full of life and laughter. And by this time in 1996, she was living with her older sister Amanda in South Perth, and both girls were incredibly close to their parents and, caught up with them as often as they could. So the night of the 26th of January 1996, Amanda picked Sarah and her friends up from a pub and dropped them off at Club Bayview in Claremont, where Sarah gave her sister a hug goodbye. Now, at around 2 a.m. the next morning on the 27th of January 1996, Sarah decided she'd had enough and she was going to head home. She called a cab at around 2:06 a.m. and instead of going home, she asked to be taken to the nearby suburb of Mossman Park for reasons not known. And she was then sighted waiting alone by 3 eyewitnesses who also reported seeing a car stop near where Sarah was. Now, when the taxi arrived to pick Sarah up at 2:09 a.m., only 3-4 minutes after she called that cab, Sarah was nowhere to be seen. When she failed to arrive home that morning or make contact with her family, they notified the police. 6 months later, on the 9th of June 1996, 23-year-old childcare worker Jane Rimmer was on a night out with friends at the exact same spot as Sarah. And just like Sarah, her movements that night included bar hopping, where she ended up at Club Bayview. Now, Jane, the daughter of Trevor and Jenny, was really close with her family, just like Sarah, and some would say that she was the apple of her father's eye. Now, even though Jane had moved out of the family home, she still saw her parents regularly, whether that was having Sunday lunch together or Jane dropping in on the way home from work to use their washing machine and have a chat. The Rimmers were a very close-knit family. And friends described Jane as a real surfer chick. She was always down at Cottesloe Beach, and she was well liked by all of them. Now, when Jane arrived at Club Bayview with her friends that night and saw the long line up to get in, her friends decided they were going to head home. But Jane decided she wanted to stay. She wanted to kick on. They bid her farewell, and the last known footage of Jane is on the club's CCTV footage, where she can be seen standing by herself but smiling at a man with dark hair. Now, it almost looks like she knows this man, or perhaps, he'd cracked a joke or said something funny, because her beaming smile is evident in that grainy footage. Jane never made contact with friends or family, never showed up to work, never showed up home. She was reported missing. And 55 days later, on the 3rd of August 1996, her naked body was found 40 kilometres, which is approximately 25 miles, away from where she was last seen in bushland near Willard by a family picking wildflowers. Jane had been brutally murdered, and there was evidence of sexual assault. 27-year-old Mossman Park lawyer Ciara Glennon was born in Zambia to Irish parents, and Ciara was the daughter of Dennis and Una and sister to Denise, and her family settled in Perth when she was around 6 years old. She loved ballet and she was smart, like super smart. She graduated from the University of WA with a law degree. She had just finished a year-long hiatus travelling the world. And when she returned to WA to be a bridesmaid at a friend's wedding, just like Sarah and Jane before her, she decided to have a night out on the town. And she too, like Sarah and Jane before her, was extremely close with her family and was well liked amongst her peers and friends, with her dad describing her as resourceful, resilient and strong-willed. On the 14th of March 1997, Sarah had been enjoying St. Patrick's Day drinks in the boardroom of the law firm where she worked. She and a small group of colleagues decided they wanted to kick on at the Continental Hotel. In the early hours of the 17th of March 1996, Ciara decided to make her way home. So she'd gone to the club with her work buddies. She'd had a few drinks and then decided, she'd had enough. Now, at around 12:30 a.m. on the 17th of March, 3 men at a bus stop saw Ciara walking alone. They also saw her talking to the driver of a light-coloured car which had stopped beside her. And when they looked again, she was gone. They didn't think anything of it. They thought perhaps she knew this man, or perhaps she just kept walking and, they were drunk and then they didn't see it or weren't paying that much attention. Ciara's mother became concerned when her daughter wasn't home the next morning, and her father raised the alarm with police, who, just like Sarah and Jane, raised public awareness and set about finding Ciara. 19 days later, on the 3rd of April 1997, Ciara's semi-clothed body was found by a bushwalker near a track of scrub in Ellington, WA, not too far from where she was last seen. There was evidence of sexual assault, and Ciara had put up a hell of a fight, and unbeknownst to police, she had managed to collect a small part of her killer's DNA underneath a fingernail, but frustratingly enough, it would be decades before he would be found. Now, the murder of Jane and Ciara and the disappearance of Sarah had the public and the media and the police on high alert. They knew now there was a serial killer on their hands, and things went into overdrive. It had already started when Sarah went missing, when a major crime squad took over her case, and this went up a notch. So when Sarah went missing, it only took 2 days for a major crime squad to take over the case from local police. And this went up a notch when Jane was murdered, and then a special task force called Macro was set up, and then also went into absolute overdrive when Ciara was murdered. The 3 girls all went missing from the same area under the same circumstances. 2 were found brutally murdered. This was no coincidence. Claremont had a serial killer on its hands, and police offered a reward of $250,000 for any info leading to an arrest, the highest reward offered in the state at the time. Police focused on the unidentified car seen at 2 of the locations, and the man Jane was seen smiling at in the CCTV footage. They also looked at the area's taxi drivers. So all the cab drivers in the area, as each girl was waiting for a cab when they went missing. This included a cab driver who came forward claiming he had given Sarah, along with a mystery man and woman, a ride to another venue the hours before her disappearance, but this led to nothing. Each taxi driver in WA, thousands of them, had their fingerprints and DNA taken, resulting in a few with dodgy criminal past being delicensed, but no suspect emerged. No stone was left unturned, and the police were relentless with their investigations, even flying in experts from overseas and having NASA in the US analyze the video footage of her laughing or talking to the man in front of the club the night she went missing. One of the investigators, Detective Superintendent Paul Ferguson, even met with the man he had helped put away in the 80s, notorious serial killer David Burney, after he got a letter from the killer stating, "I can tell you from a serial killer's perspective what I'd be thinking if that was me." David and his wife Catherine abducted, raped and murdered 4 women in their Perth home and were caught when a 5th intended victim managed to escape. And yes, I have covered this case. There is a podcast available for it if you want to go back and have a listen. And Detective Ferguson met with David in prison to piece together the psychology of who they were looking for. But the results of that meeting, what they talked about, it is not known. And despite the publicity and the efforts of the police and the girls' families to find who murdered and kidnapped their daughters, it very quickly went cold. They even had 11 reviews and reshuffle of staff, and suspects were few and far between. Now, the case did go cold, but for a while there, police did zero in on a man called Lance Williams. Now, Lance was a 41-year-old man who lived with his parents close to where the girls had gone missing, and he had a fondness for cruising around the streets of Perth after dark in his white Hyundai, which was not unlike the vehicle that some people thought they'd seen around the time the girls had gone missing. Now, female police officers even went as far as to dress like they'd been out been out clubbing for the night, and then waited in the area where the victims waited, hoping to lure the killer out of the shadows. And when Lance offered one of them a lift home when she had asked him where the bus stop was when he stopped by her, they thought they had their man and started surveillance on him. Now, police arrested him on the 5th of February 1998 as he cruised through the streets of Claremont in the early hours, and they interrogated him for 12 hours with no lawyer present. He was eventually released with no charge, but they were relentless with their pursuit of him, and they upped their surveillance on him 24/7. Both at his home and workplace, they searched his parents' home where he lived, dug up their backyard, and took their cars away for forensics. Each of these turning up nothing. Media caught wind of this, and Lance was hounded and watched by the media and police 24/7. They were relentless. When asked by waiting reporters if he was the serial killer, he replied, "All I had was concern, that there was women walking around Claremont on their own late at night, especially from what had happened all the years before." By 1999, police ended their 24/7 surveillance on him, but still undertook raids of his home up until 2004. Lance Williams died from cancer in February 2018, aged 61. Family members said he had terrible anxiety from how he was treated by police and media for all those years. Another suspect who went as far to say the police ruined his life, former Claremont Mayor Peter Weigers. Now, Peter was Mayor of Claremont for 12 years and was the president of the Council of Civil Liberties for 30 years. Now, this role left him at odds with many in the media, the police, and local politicians in WA. As well as all this, he was a senior school psychologist, and despite his really impressive resume, he will be remembered as a suspected serial killer. Now, Peter became a suspect when in 1996 a local newspaper ran the headline, "Mayor refuses to help Rimmer police." And with that, the rumour mill went into overdrive. Police raided his properties. People in the street yelled at him, calling him a killer. They harassed his family. And at one stage, a severed cat's head was left in his letterbox. He lost the chance to be re-elected as mayor and was shunned by his community, all thanks to his trial by media. To this very day, Peter has not received an apology from the police or the media for destroying his life, and has never been given the reason as to why he was all of a sudden a suspect. The case eventually went cold until 2009, when forensic scientists recovered and tested the previously untested DNA from Ciara's left middle finger and left thumbnail. So Ciara had put up an absolute fight for her life and managed to scratch her attacker, getting some of his DNA under her middle fingernail and her thumbnail. Now, the DNA was linked to a DNA profile found in an unsolved rape and abduction at Karrakatta Cemetery in 1995. In this case, a 17-year-old girl was walking home from a night out and was grabbed from behind, tied up with a pre-prepared handcuff knot, and driven to the cemetery with a hood over her face where she had been raped repeatedly. Now, forensics had managed to lift small blue fibres from her shorts. Now, these small blue fibres were also found on Jane Rimmer and Ciara Glennon. But even with these links, so they've got the DNA that's now matched what was found on this rape victim. They've got the fibres from an item of clothing found on the rape victim and the two murder victims. Even with this, they had no match. They had no DNA to match this to, and the case went cold again until a breakthrough in 2016. Now, we've got to first, before we go back to 2016, we need to go back even further to 1988. On the 15th of February 1988, in the Western Australian suburb of Huntington, an 18-year-old girl awoke to find a man straddling her with his hand over her mouth. Now, the girl fought back and dug a fingernail into his cheek, which made him jump off her and run as she screamed out for her father. And as she did so, she managed to get a glimpse of her attacker. He was tall and wearing something long and white. Now, police later found that something long and white. It was a silk kimono, and it was found in a nearby field. They grabbed it, put it in evidence box and locked it away. 28 years later, they pulled that kimono out for DNA testing and got a match. Not only for the Calcutta rape, but for the man who killed Ciara Glennon. The blue fibres found on the girls proved to match a work uniform for a tradesman, and a tradesman who worked for a company called Telecom. Now, Telecom, now known as Telstra, is Australia's biggest telecommunications company. And at around this time, several witnesses came forward to say they had seen a Telstra work car cruising around the same time the girls, that Jane and Ciara and Sarah went missing. Police knew this was more than just a coincidence. They finally had a bona fide suspect, and he had been under their noses the entire time. And police would quickly learn that if Telecom, way back in 1996 when the murders had happened, had not accidentally omitted a certain man's name from a list of employees they sent to the police when the police were looking for a suspect, and they were looking for everybody, they would have seen an employee who had an assault charge against his name, an assault charge of a woman in her workplace. Now we now need to go to May 1990. So in May 1990, while working in Hollywood Hospital, WA, a social worker by the name of Wendy Davies came across a tradesman from the telecom company who was working on telephone lines in the hospital. Wendy was working in her office, and without warning, the tradesman grabbed her from behind while she was alone and put a cloth over her mouth, trying to drag her into the toilet. She struggled and she fell backwards, and everything just stopped. Wendy stated, "I fell back and looked at him. He was just standing there with a blank look in his eyes. It was like he was looking at me, but looking right through me." The man was charged and given 2 years probation, and his employer, Telecom, didn't keep any record of this attack on his file, none whatsoever. They even promoted him the following year. And not only that, when a representative for Telstra met with Wendy after the attack, they advocated for their employee, excusing the attack as a man who had snapped under the pressure of a relationship breakdown, and that he had agreed to get some counselling. Wendy's concerns were also dismissed by police, as she felt let down that her attacker had only been charged with common assault, and she struggled. She quit her job because of the trauma and tried her best to get on with her life, but she was still haunted by her attack. The man in question was Bradley Edwards, and if his name had been put forward all those years beforehand, police would have seen he had form. But he was now on their radar, and after tracking him and grabbing a bottle of Sprite that he threw in the bin at the movies and taking his DNA off it, they found his DNA matched that found on the kimono and the cemetery rape victim. It also matched the DNA found under Ciara Glennon's fingernails. The police finally had their man and arrested him on a stinking hot summer's day on the 22nd of December 2016. The man, now suspected of and was most certainly the Claremont serial killer was 51-year-old Bradley Robert Edwards. He was a seemingly ordinary guy. He was a loyal employee, a devoted stepdad, and a guy who volunteered in his community and loved his footy. He was unremarkable in every way. Well, only the side of him that he showed. From a young age, started stealing women's underwear and nightgowns from his neighbours' clotheslines. He graduated to rape and assault by his early 20s, and when he was arrested, police found half-written rape fantasies, extreme porn, homemade sex toys, and sandwich bags filled with semen, which were tied with women's scrunchies in his house. Police also found a rape fantasy titled Chloe, which detailed a woman being gagged and then raped, with the opening line reading, "They say you always remember your first. In my case, I consider my first Chloe." Women who had been in relationships with him, including an escort worker who saw him regularly, stated they never saw a dark side to him. One commented he appeared to be emotionally stunted, but his dark side was never shown to them. Bradley very quickly was charged with the murder of Jane Rimmer and Ciara Glennon, and police alleged he kidnapped both girls in his Telstra-issued Commodore, drove them to separate remote areas and murdered them. They were unable to charge him with the death of Sarah Spiers as it fell under the no body, no crime rule, though there is no doubt that she met the same fate as Jane and Ciara. Bradley's family were quick to defend him, saying he wasn't a serial killer, he could never do something like this. But DNA doesn't lie. Bradley quickly confessed to the cemetery rape and the hospital attack, but denied killing Jane and Ciara. The trial was set for late 1999. It ran for 7 months with evidence and testimony from over 200 witnesses, and on the 23rd of December, the courtroom erupted with applause when Justice Hall handed down a 619-page verdict, which found Bradley guilty of the murder of Jane Rimmer and Ciara Glennon and sentenced him to life in jail. Justice Hall stated he was no doubt involved in the disappearance of Sarah, but he could not be charged as her body had not been found. Justice Hall told Bradley in sentencing, "I recognise that there is a high likelihood that you will die in prison. You were a dangerous predator who sought out vulnerable young women and attacked them for your own gratification. You targeted unsuspecting women who are usually completely unknown to you." The decision was welcomed by the victims' families and the police have stated they will keep looking and searching until Sarah Spiers' body is found and justice has been served. The Claremont serial killer, the man who had eluded police for decades, had finally been found and justice had been served. Bradley Edwards will serve out his life sentence in Casuarina Prison, WA, and he will likely die there. To this day, Sarah Spiers' body has still not been found. And if anyone listening has any information on where her body can be found, please notify the police. Let's bring Sarah home and let's give her family some closure. And there we have it, guys. The story of the Claremont serial killer, a very ordinary man who was anything but ordinary. Thank you for listening. You are all absolute rock stars. And if you're enjoying these episodes, please share the word. I would love to have more of you on board. You can buy me a coffee. You can send me a text. You can send me a comment on my YouTube channel. I don't bite, I promise. And you can also subscribe. If you do subscribe, I will be giving you bonus ghost stories. Australia is wonderfully haunted. Come discover it with me. And until next time, guys, thank you again for listening. You are all absolute rock stars. Stay safe, stay cool, and stay caffeinated. I will catch you all later.